Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
There are going to be people out there in all of our lives who will give that really important perspective to the things in life that really matter. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brains on not only current projects, but state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational way, because that's how we like to do it over here. And if you'd like to keep listening to how we do it over here, and you're listening to us right now, so I think that you do, you can find all of our podcasts either over at Apple, over at Spotify, or you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you'd follow us on social media. You can find us over at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and probably most importantly, if you could do us the kindness of visiting us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where our hardworking team is working effortlessly. Well, I don't want to say effortlessly because they work hard, and they're working 7 days a week and producing movie reviews, news, content lists, all sorts of things that you need to navigate the media landscape these days, and in determining what you need to watch and what you don't need to watch, because those movies happen too. But that's a nice dovetail into this episode, because I think this is a movie you need to watch. It is going to be on VOD platforms tomorrow, February 23rd, and it is called My Name Is Pedro. It is an inspirational look at an educator sort of hitting the ground running in places where, like the South Bronx, where we meet Pedro Santana, a inspirational guy who really went above and beyond when it comes to changing the face of public education and sort of the importance of teachers and being able to nurture kids and sort of understanding the importance of learning, especially in systems that may not know how to encourage that the right way, because everyone learns differently, and that's the important thing that we tend to forget sometimes. And this film really does highlight that in so many different ways. And we get to sit down with the filmmaker, Lillian Lasalle, to talk about the film, why she ended up directing it herself. It is her first feature documentary film, and just the ride that she went on following Pedro Santana, who is this incredibly unique and compelling individual that you need to learn more about, because he's changed a lot of people's lives, and it's a reminder that teachers can change a lot of people's lives as well. And it's one of those things that it's important to highlight, especially these days in our various stages of lockdown and pandemic. And kids need to have those positive experiences as safely and as best they can. And again, this is a really beautiful sort of inspirational story that I was so happy that I got to see, that we're now sort of getting to share with the world. And I do recommend you go check it out on most of your VOD platforms tomorrow when it becomes available, because it is very well worth your time, as well as our talk with Lillian, because she was absolutely fascinating, and I had a delightful talk with her, and I hope you enjoy, because I certainly did myself.
Are those Netflix pillows?
Yes, they are. They seem to be the source of conversation whenever I do it.
How did you get them?
I stole them from a cocktail party.
Fantastic.
Well, I mean, obviously, first off, just thank you for the time. I really do appreciate this, and
Yeah.
congratulations on the movie, man. It is a lovely, lovely film. And I mean, I guess the first question is, how did you find this fantastic subject to make a film about?
Thank you. Pedro Santana is a great subject. huge gift to get him as a documentary filmmaker. And the way I found Pedro is that he was highlighted in the New York Times because he had changed a failing school around in the South Bronx, a middle school in the South Bronx, where he taught. And the change was so significant that they highlighted him in the article. And they highlighted him and his, what we call in the film, his out of the box teaching style and techniques, and also his unique way of being with his students. The article was called The Principal's Office, and they talked about the positive effect of what Pedro was doing, which was that he had an open door policy. So any parent, any teacher, any student could stop by at any time, and his door was open. There was no appointment needed, because his mission was to be there not just for the students, but for his staff and the parents and the community. And the thing that he did with his office was take out all the formal furniture that you usually find in a principal's office and decorate it with sofas, a seating area, computers for the students to use if they were on a break and needed, time to work on something. And so it was all those things. He was very big into environment and how that affected kids' learning. And from school to school, he actually changed the physical building to accommodate more learning. And all of that was highlighted in the article. I was transfixed, and I called him the next day. And since he was a person of immediacy, which is something else that's highlighted in My Name is Pedro, he very surprisingly said, well, why don't we meet tomorrow? And I was totally unprepared for that answer. And I went to meet him the next day, and we decided to make a documentary. It was as quick as that.
So the open door policy applies to documentarians as well. It wasn't necessarily a hard sell to get them on board.
There were a lot of, since he was highlighted in the New York Times, there were a lot of independent filmmakers who approached him and called him. And upon meeting me, he said, you know what, Lillian, I like you. I want you to make this film. I want you to tell this story.
Just dovetails into my next question, because I was curious. You had produced things before, but this was your first time in the director's chair. Was it just sort of the magnetism of Pedro that sort of made you want to sort of get behind the camera on this one? Or like, what was it? What was the sort of the drive for this to be the first film you directed?
That's right. I actually intended to produce the film. I did not intend to direct it. After meeting Pedro, I put some footage together in order to show some directors that I liked the footage to see if they would like to jump on board as a director. And when I took that footage and that I shot and showed it to a mentor of mine in the industry, she said, well, Lillian, you're the director. And I said, no, thank you. I've never directed anything before. I can't take on this challenge. And she said, yes, you can. I want you to take on this challenge. You're going to be terrific. And we spent 7 years shooting Pedro.
Wow.
So that first time experience was great, with a little bit of a shove and encouragement from a mentor. Changed my life.
How was he, just in terms of, I don't mean sort of, I think embedded is almost the wrong word, but because, obviously you're showing a lot of positive moments, but there's also some not so positive moments. And especially I laugh about just sort of the bit where he's on the couch watching Maury, and it's like, that's an uncomfortable moment to sort of admit and sort of say to the camera, like, how open was he in terms of not just showing the good stuff that he did, but maybe sort of the bad stuff that may have happened as well?
Mhm. I was committed to showing the whole story.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be a puff piece, so to speak,
Right.
about how amazing Pedro was, because that to me could have worked as a short film
Yeah.
to inspire people with his incredible optimism, with his open heart, with the way that he approached people in the world. As you saw, he hugged everyone
Yeah.
he met. um, Both Pedro and I decided that we wanted to show the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it was to be a human being, of what it meant to be a human being working within the public education system, and the challenges that he had to face. And so, for people who haven't seen My Name is Pedro yet, and I sure hope they tune into all the
On
streaming
VOD
platforms.
imminently, coming soon.
Yes, that's right. On February 23rd, they can watch the film. Um, there are a lot of twists and turns and unexpected moments, and there's tragedy in
Yeah.
the film as well, which we won't give away in the interview. Um, but we decided together, and he was very brave. He wanted the camera to capture everything.
Well, that's one of the things that really struck me. And I mean, especially, again, not spoiling it, but that particular moment towards the end where you really do capture a very raw moment where he's speaking to a group of people. It felt very, it gave the whole thing a real visceral sort of tangibility to it, if that makes any kind of sense, because we could really sort of understand how the community was so emotionally invested in this amazing man.
Yeah. That part, the secret part, we won't tell our audience now, was completely unexpected. And when that tragedy happened, I actually asked Pedro, I said, well, I guess we are at the end of filming, because surely you don't want to show this on camera. This seems so personal and so deep. I don't know if audiences can handle it. I don't know how the community will handle this. And he said, again, he said, no, this is a chapter in my life. I want you to get this on camera. And then to show up at that huge auditorium in Nyack, which is the Nyack Center, because all he told me was that I'm going to meet with some members of the community to explain what's going on
Wow. So you
and
got
to
blindsided
walk
too.
into
Wow.
what's that?
You got blindsided as well. So
I was blindsided. I had never been to the Nyack Center. So for all I knew, there were 25 seats in there. There were hundreds of seats. It was standing room only. Every seat was taken. So these were parents, these were students. I thought to myself, you know, it's interesting. Another interviewer described him as being almost guru-like. And that's what I thought. I thought of that many times when I was making the film, but that moment, that night, really surprised me. The hundreds of people that came out to support him, you're right, really blindsided me. And I was so thrilled to have a camera crew with me as opposed to one camera,
right.
where it would have been much harder to actually capture the magnitude of that. So I was glad I was prepared.
Now, I mean, when you're going into a film like this and you're following a subject like Pedro, I mean, can you have a conscious sense of where the film is going to end? Because I'm always curious about these films, especially when you'll meet a subject and you'll read an article and you'll follow him and you'll see what he does. The movie has to end at some point. Like, I'm kind of curious, like, were there other endings in your mind, like when you were putting it all together, or is it just, were you still in the process of sort of trying to put everything together and then, okay, oh no, this is the ending. No, wait, no, it's not really the ending. There's still more to go.
Yeah, that was a great challenge. The way I approached the film, and as a first-time director, I did this on total instinct, gut instinct. I had no idea what the ultimate story was going to be. And I had no idea how long it would take. I had no idea when I was going to stop filming. I did reach out to someone at documentary, uh, HBO documentaries, and I asked him, when will I know when I'm done? I mean, this just keeps going and going. And his answer was, you'll know when you know.
Wow. I like that.
I liked it too, but at the same time, I thought, well,
Oh, it's terrifying. I can imagine.
that's terrible. Why would you give me such a fake answer? Please, someone tell me. You know, when in life you have a decision to make, let's say it's between three different things, that
Right.
could be, you know, whatever it is, you know, buying a house or where to send your kid to school or whatever it is. And you just wish that, you know, an answer from the heavens would show up on a billboard and tell you what to do. that's what I was looking for. But he was absolutely right. And it gave me the freedom to just keep shooting and trust my instinct. And I'm really glad I did. There are some incredible documentarians who I'm a huge fan of, who actually really write a script and outline of what the film is going to cover from beginning to end. And so they really have a plan. And they also go into these interviews with a list of questions they want to ask written down.
Yeah.
And I never had questions written down. I showed up with cameras and I asked questions based on what I was feeling at the time and what I was getting from Pedro, what I saw in the environment around Pedro that I wanted to get on camera, where I would tell the camera person or persons, can you capture that painting? Oh, now when Pedro's walking down the street, you see how he's walking, like, I want you to capture that. And then I would start, in regard to my interviews, those could be short interviews. They tended to be longer. And again, I didn't learn this anywhere. I didn't go to film school to
Right.
become a director, but my gut instinct was to let the reactions and answers from Pedro last longer than the camera people wanted them to last. So for instance, what I learned is that a lot of the people on my crew were used to doing documentaries where you get the answer to the question and you either move on or you stop shooting.
Yeah.
And then you move to a new location. In this case, I instructed my crew to not stop shooting, to watch, for the camera to capture the silence.
Yeah.
And stay with the silence, because what I would find is that in that silence, Pedro would have more to say.
Yeah.
And it was usually, and it was usually in those moments that we got the really incredible meaty stuff that we ended up using in the film.
And I love that you say that, because I mean, especially when I do stuff like this, I try not to go in too overly scripted and just let it sort of flow and sort of happen. And I think the magic of this film is that, yeah, you could have done this as a short and it would have been inspirational and pleasant and fine, but you let it sit, and it goes beyond the affectation of Pedro, the subject of what he's trying to sell and the message that he's pushing. And we really get into something where we get to know a bit more about him, which I think is the really, like you say, the meatier and more interesting part of his entire story.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question.
Do it.
Since you've watched the film, and some interviewers skim through the film or they just watch the trailer. So right. I'm so pleased that you watched the film. I'm wondering what the things, because I learn as a filmmaker so much still from people's feedback. I mean, what were the main points that resonated with you? Like, what was your takeaway from the film?
Because I mean, at least for, I mean, obviously just the magnetism of him as a subject, but I think especially like when it comes into the first act of the film and we're getting to know him, there really is this sense of, okay, he's this positive teacher, he's doing good things, fantastic, but you're still sort of dealing with the fact that there may be an artifice to what he's trying to sell, to what he's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Then as the film evolves and gets deeper into it, we see that no, he's living this 24/7. He's just a remarkable human being that is drawing these people into sort of what he wants to do and how he wants to help people, sort of. And
Mm-hmm.
and it makes it really an emotional and beautiful thing. And I was so struck, just especially towards the end. I mean, I think you were having testimonials with people like Asif and other people, and just the line of the meaning of enthusiasm, just the breakdown of that, and just the sharing of God, the sharing of spirit, which
Mm-hmm.
really sort of tied it up into this sort of magnificent bow of who this guy seemingly really was. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
film allows us to get to know who he was as opposed to what he was trying to do.
Right. So who he was uh, versus what his mission was.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that all of that is shown together. Well, that helps me a lot. And I love hearing that. And what he was is such a great part of the story because he taught in low income communities. And a lot of his students were people of color who grew up in these communities, often who were students of two full-time working parents in households that were just getting by.
Yeah.
And some of those households not even being able to afford to have books in the house or a computer in the house. And they were not used to having a teacher, principal, administrator, all the things that Pedro did, to having this person in that position, also also a person of color, talk so openly about his life where they really related to him. He talked about being a special ed student as a kid. He talked about growing up in poverty. He talked openly about having to be an English speaking advocate for his mother, who only spoke Spanish, at the welfare office, having to be her interpreter, what he called his he had to be his ambassador for his mother. He talked openly about his father being a drug addict, a former drug addict, and being in jail, and his mom being homeless for a time. And I think that these students were so struck by his honesty, and some of those students could really relate. And I think because they could relate so much, like you said, their enthusiasm in the room with him opened up their minds and prepared them for listening. And isn't that such a big part of learning? The listening aspect, being present in the classroom as opposed to being checked out.
For sure.
And yeah, and in that footage I show of him giving a speech to students in the library, you can see, and we capture on camera, some of the students being a little skeptical about him at first,
Yeah.
right? Like, who is this guy? Why am I sitting here? And then, a quarter of the way into his engagement with them, they're all in. They're laughing, they're raising their hands. I'm having chills just talking about it. But as a parent now of an 11 and 14-year-old, that makes such a difference in learning, and I also want to mention that we didn't purposely make a plan. I mean, there was no way to do this,
Right.
to release the film on February 23rd. We had to make that decision months ago, but we didn't realize that that would be the same week that it's being discussed now that children return to the classroom
Yeah.
after being in remote learning. And what I love about this is that the conversation is being had, and that there is this film about the power of teachers in education. In particular, even though anyone in the country, in the world, can watch the film and be inspired by Pedro and by him, I love that I'm a Brooklynite. I've lived in New York all my life. I went to public school. Um, that uh, that this is coming up in a time where, like I said, we're introducing this education film about this person where these students really need it. And you know who else really needs it? Are the teachers who really need at this time to be lifted up and celebrated.
Yeah.
They, in particular, are having such a challenge teaching at home.
Yeah.
And they're having to decide really to put their lives at risk to return to the classroom.
Yeah.
Right. And that might be mandated. And that's scary for teachers. And we don't talk enough about that. I remember in the beginning of remote learning, myself and other parents had a lot of complaints about it. Oh, my child is not learning. We're not getting what we deserve from their free education. This isn't fair. They're not tuned in. And at that time, we didn't take a lot of time to recognize the teachers.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that our teachers need to be uplifted constantly, and they need to be paid more. That's right.
Yeah.
That's part of a bigger and separate conversation. But how about some of our taxpayer money
Yeah.
go to these teachers who so deserve it, who have dedicated their lives to helping kids?
Yeah.
You know, I'd be very happy for my tax money to be more concentrated on that area. So I'm so thrilled that this, by coincidence, that this release of My Name is Pedro is happening at the same.
For sure. No, and you froze. There you go. Okay, you're back.
Oh, where did I freeze?
Oh, I think you were just finishing up. So I think we're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just in terms of the release of the film on the 23rd. But yeah. And I mean, I think it really does all come. Something else you brought up, which I think is so important, especially these days,
Mm-hmm.
given the global situation and the various stages of lockdown we're all sort of sitting through, depending on where we are. I think it's the importance of having a degree of openness and just being able to talk about stuff, which Pedro was so very willing and easy to do, because it's important to talk about things
Mm-hmm.
like social issues, how you're feeling, how you're not feeling. And we've been in such a society and world where if you didn't feel how you were supposed to be feeling and it was projected on TV, then you don't talk about it. You just push it away and you don't deal with it. But no, that's not right. You're supposed to talk about it, and it's a healthier thing to talk about it. And if
Mm-hmm.
you try to hide something, also live in a world where you can't hide anything really. It's just the nature of how we're all living our lives now. And he really does sort of give this very like for almost forward thinking sort of mantra to put forth to students, which I think is an important thing, to be able to be open and talk and discuss about anything.
That's so true. He really surprised me, in particular with his home visits
Yeah.
to students and families. So what I'm used to as a parent and my experience as a public school student is that if you're having an issue, you're having a problem, uh, you make an appointment to see the principal.
Mm.
And he was very aware of the impossibility of these parents being able to make an appointment and show up in the middle of the day. How can they do that when they're trying to support their families?
Right.
So in the evenings, if he would get a call from, someone who was involved in school, there were also a couple of activists in the community who would know of certain families, let's say, like the student we highlight who is about to drop out of school.
Mm.
And she's deciding to drop out of school because she's failing some classes. She feels like there's no hope. And he shows up, he calls the parent. He also speaks French. So the parent is a French speaking mom. And he calls her and says, I hear you're having some challenges with your daughter. Is it okay if I come over? Which she was very happy about. And as you say, when he sat down with her, he talked about real stuff. He didn't have canned questions and canned responses.
Yeah.
They sat on the carpet. He shared photographs of his son and his daughter, and talked to her about, her sibling, and got on the same page with her, and said, when he asks her the question, so do you feel like this is the end of the road? Like this is, this is your only choice, is to drop out? And her answer was, I feel like it's too late to turn it around. And he says, no, it's never too late. Tell me which classes are your most challenging ones. Okay, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to get you a buddy in school who is going to be your advocate and mentor, sort of like an advisor, what we would call an advisor now.
Right.
But advisors are not very plentiful in schools in low-income neighborhoods. Who's going to be your buddy and is going to walk you through all the reasons why you're not going to drop out. And in that case, I asked him after the interview, so what do you think happened there? What do you think she's going to drop out of school? And his answer was, I don't know. I don't know. There's a 50%. I know for sure she's going to come see me tomorrow. And after that, there's a 50% chance. But at least we put in our 50%, right?
Right.
Then on the other side of that, he had very real conversations with a problematic student of his who had a lot of challenges in middle school, was making trouble in the hallway, was giving teachers a hard time. And after having time with Pedro, who paid a lot of attention with him, he was very lucky because he had a mother that was very involved. We then get to see him at Stony Brook University as a college student, as a successful college student, where he talks about the fact that Pedro changed his life and the trajectory of his life, and that also he embodies a lot of the leadership skills that he learned from Pedro. So did I answer your question?
I think you did. I think you did. Now, I mean, I guess just to put a bow on this, because I mean, obviously you were a producer turned first-time filmmaker, and this was, just by talking to you, I can tell this was a very personal project for you. And I'm kind of curious, going forward, do you see yourself in the director's chair again, or is it just going to be one of those questions of, will it end up being kismet if you find the right article, if you talk to the right person? How do you see yourself going forward as a producer and filmmaker?
I think that, well, I'm already, my next documentary is going to be starting in March. So I do have another documentary in mind. And you're right, Pedro became a very personal project for me because being around him affected me so much. It changed my perspective. It changed the way I view the world. It changed the way I am as a person and also as a leader. But in terms of the direction I'm going, I am keeping it within the realm of very personal stories.
Okay.
So in this case, so it seems like I'm very attracted to this genre. And so in this case, it's actually going to be about my family. And without getting into details, there's a lot of challenges and turmoil that centers around mental illness.
For sure.
So it addresses mental illness, just like this My Name is Pedro addresses public education, but is not just about public education.
Right.
It's not an issues film. I didn't want to make an issue film. So I don't want to make an issue film about mental illness and how the attention to that needs to be improved in our country.
Yeah.
I want to show the real life experience of a family who is fraught with mental illness and have very real conversations with my three brothers. It's going to be called Three Brothers, about their challenges, and have it be a verite film of following them. One of my brothers lives in another country, so I'll have to go there to do my interviews with him and talk about my childhood and also talk to them about it. They're a generation older than I am.
Right.
Of what I went through, because it was a lot for a small child to witness. And so that's going to be my next project. And hopefully that won't take 10 years to finish. I think I've got a little bit more of the hang of it now, and hopefully it'll be half that time.
Well, I look forward to it. And you know what? I love that you said how making this film and Pedro sort of changed your perspective on life and how you live.
Totally.
Because it did for me just by watching the darn thing. And I think that's the real magic of it. And I just want to say congratulations again on the film. I hope everyone gets to see it. And this was a delight. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for having me.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.